All right, let's get going. Thank you so much for coming. Great to see a nice full house here at the Korea Society. And I know we also had 200 people sign up to watch this, stream it virtually. So thank you very much, Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins and Major Jessica Taylor. You've drawn quite a crowd, and I think that's a testament to the good work that you're doing. So welcome to today's program, Deterring North Korea. My name is Jonathan Corrado. I'm the Director of Policy here at the Korea Society. Today in this discussion, we are going to explore how the US-Korea Alliance can respond to threats posed by Pyongyang's evolving nuclear, missile, and space capabilities, as well as its proliferation and procurement activities. And a lot of headlines should be jumping out at you when I say all of that. I want to jump right in today because we've got so much to talk about. And so first I'll introduce our honored guests. First, we've got Ambassador Bonnie Denise Jenkins, PhD, who has served as the Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security since July 2021. As Undersecretary, she leads 3 bureaus: the Arms Control Compliance and Verification Bureau, the International Security Non-Proliferation Bureau, and the Political Military Affairs Bureau. In addition, as of May 2023, Secretary of State Antony Blinken named Undersecretary Jenkins as the senior official to lead the department's efforts on AUKUS implementation. So whenever I feel really busy and tapped out, I'm just going to remind myself that you wear like 5 hats. I'll calm down. Undersecretary Jenkins previously served in the Obama administration as Special Envoy and Coordinator for Threat Reduction Programs in the Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation from July 2009 until January 2017. From its inception in 2017 until April 2021, Ambassador Jenkins was the founder, executive director, and board chair of Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, which is, I believe, how you met Major Jessica Taylor. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Jenkins.
Thanks for inviting me.
Major Jessica Taylor, U.S. Air Force Reserve, is a non-resident fellow in the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. She is currently pursuing her PhD in International Relations with a focus on Indo-Pacific at Princeton University's School of Public and International Affairs. She's a regular guest here at the Korea Society and a good friend of ours. Thank you so much for coming today, Jessica. Before I turn it over to our panelists, I want to thank the Korea Foundation and our corporate sponsors for making this program possible. Ambassador Jenkins, I was hoping we could start with you. Could you please provide us with a bit of an overview? What are the challenges of deterring North Korea in 2024, and what is the US-ROK Alliance strategy to address these challenges?
Great. So first of all, I do have a short introductory remarks here, but I first also want to thank you for inviting me. I know that we've been trying to make this happen for a while, so we're glad that we can finally do that. So thank you for this. So I'm just going to say a few things just to kind of start out, and then we can go from there. So I want to highlight that we marked a historic milestone last year. It was the 70th anniversary of the US-ROK Alliance. As an alliance, we are growing ever stronger in the face of new and evolving threats. In 2023, the same year as this milestone, we observed the DPRK continue its unprecedented pace of ballistic missile launches in violation of multiple U.S. Security Council resolutions and at enormous cost to its own people. They began 2024 much the same way they ended 2023, with an ICBM test on January 15th and several cruise missile tests. The DPRK has also engaged in threatening and irresponsible rhetoric regarding its weapons programs, including by characterizing some of its missile launches and other military activities as trial runs for the use of nuclear weapons. Each missile launch and nuclear saber-rattling speech demonstrates the DPRK's determination to advance its unlawful WMD and ballistic missile programs, underscoring the importance of growing and adapting our alliance with the Republic of Korea to better prepare to defend against potential attacks, including nuclear employment. The U.S. is committed to the defense of the Republic of Korea and our defense remains ironclad, and our goal remains the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The Biden administration is pursuing a calibrated response to the DPRK's escalatory actions based on the degree of threat they pose to the United States and our allies. Enhancing and strengthening extended deterrence for the Republic of Korea is a priority of the administration. In 2023, we took significant steps toward that goal. Last April, President Biden and President Yoon announced the Washington Declaration, which established the new Nuclear Consultative Group, or NCG, and call for increased military exercises, simulations, and enhancing the visibility of strategic asset deployments to the Korean Peninsula. These steps illustrate President Biden's and President Yoon's resolve to address the DPRK's dangerous and destabilizing activities and rhetoric through a stronger deterrent effort. The NCG met twice in 2023, once in Seoul and once in Washington. At these meetings, both sides recognized that US-ROK nuclear deterrence cooperation has deepened as progress has been achieved through frequent meetings of the NCG Working Group on NCG work streams that include guidelines, security and information sharing protocols, nuclear consultation processes in crisis and contingencies, strategic communications, exercises, simulations, and training, and risk reduction practices. The NCG has also allowed us to deepen cooperation, learning, and engagement among our interagency partners. One key example is Extended Nuclear Deterrence Immersion course that the United States hosted this past November in Washington for interagency colleagues from the ROK government. In addition to establishing the NCG, the United States and Republic of Korea reconvened annual meetings of the Extended Deterrence Strategy and Consulting Group, or EDSCG, in 2022 and 2023, after a 4-year hiatus. State co-chairs the EDSCG with the Department of Defense. The forum is valuable and unique for enabling conversation about the holistic security challenges facing the alliance in the Indo-Pacific region. It is also mutually complementary with the NCG and other alliance bodies. In the fourth meeting of the EDSCG, held last September, my co-chairs and I reaffirmed the commitment of our nations to use all available levers, including diplomatic, informational, military, and economic tools, to reinforce the U.S. security commitment to the ROK. We are dedicated to a whole-of-government approach that considers military capabilities, strategic messaging, and risk reduction measures. Through these and other efforts to enhance extended deterrence, the United States and ROK are taking prudent steps in the face of advancing DPRK nuclear and missile capabilities, as well as its destabilizing and dangerous rhetoric. It is important to recall U.S. policy on this issue. Any nuclear attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies is unacceptable and will result in the end of the Kim regime, and any nuclear attack by the DPRK against the ROK will be met with a swift, overwhelming, and decisive response. I want to emphasize the enduring commitment of both the United States and the Republic of Korea to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the bedrock of the global nuclear order. The ROK government has been clear in its rejection of any intent to develop an independent nuclear arsenal and continues to reaffirm its commitment to the NPT and the ironclad U.S. commitment to the security of the ROK. The United States recognizes that in today's security environment, our efforts to maintain and strengthen deterrence must be paralleled by a continued charge toward diplomacy and dialogue to resolve difficult security challenges. As such, both the United States and the Republic of Korea remain steadfast in our pursuit of dialogue with the DPRK without preconditions, and see diplomacy as the only viable means of achieving a lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador Jenkins. You teed up a lot of stuff that we're going to get a chance to dig into later, and I was really happy to hear all that progress that's been made on the NCG. Not sure what was going on from the outside, and that's very heartening to hear that all that has been done. So I'll ask you one follow-up here, and then I'm going to turn to Major Jessica Taylor for her take on everything that's going on. So over the past few years, as you well know, North Korea has been testing and developing platforms that pose significant challenges to our allied deterrence posture. Just to name a few, this includes satellite surveillance and solid fuel ICBMs, which improve the accuracy and range of North Korea's nuclear arsenal. And they've got all sorts of exotic delivery vehicles, sea-based, land-based, air-based. There are concerns about missile defense as it currently stands. So my question for you is, do we currently assess that North Korea has second strike capability? Do they have the ability to withstand an initial nuclear blow and then continue to use nuclear forces in a retaliation? And how can the U.S. and South Korea evolve in order to meet this advancing threat?
I think the one thing to consider is that we are recognizing and paying close attention to developments in the DPRK with their military capabilities. And one of the things that we do on a regular basis is continue to assess our own deterrence capabilities. I think sometimes people think that we have deterrence and that's kind of it, and that's what we decide that we're going to do in terms of any country as we talk about deterrence. But it's a continuing effort, and as we see the developments that's happening in North Korea with the ballistic missile tests, with other things that you mentioned, we continue to reassess our abilities uh, to deter. And I will just say, and I think everybody knows, we look there are some countries that we call hard targets, and I don't mean targeting in terms of targeting, but hard targets in terms of our abilities to deter and the challenges to deter, particularly when you have countries that don't want to have diplomatic engagements with you, despite our offers. So what I will say is, assessing what their capabilities are is part of the process. And that's going on a regular basis, and that's something that our Department of Defense is looking at. In terms of hard security deterrence, we're looking at it in terms of diplomatic side and how we can engage them, and it's a continuous effort as we look at the advancements of that country, of other countries, as we ensure that we're able to defend ourselves and defend our allies and our partners. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ambassador Jenkins. And so, Jessica, over to you. So, what more can be done? Talking another THAAD battery, more integration with Japan and Trilateral, right? These kinds of things have been mentioned. So, what's your assessment?
Well, first, I want to thank Ambassador Jenkins for being here and taking the time and all the work that you do for women of color in the national security space and molding us and getting us ready for our next steps. And also, thank you to my good friend Jonathan for having me. You took the words right out of my mouth, really, when we were talking about missile defense. We do need to see more cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and the U.S., especially in missile defense arenas. And that's starting to come to be.
Yeah.
And the more that we see that, I think that will give more public assurance. But as far as where the DPRK is going, I think that's why it's so important that we're paying attention to the fact that he's paying so much attention to the Navy and, wanting to possibly go after a second strike capability in his submarine arena. So that is, if we ever see that achieved, it's going to bring more questions about whether or not the U.S. will come to South Korea's aid, and we're just going to have to be able to be ahead of that.
Right. Very well said. Okay, so let's go to the question of South Korea potentially developing its own nuclear weapon. So recently, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol reiterated South Korea's commitment to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. However, when you look at survey results of just normal South Korean people, it suggested that there's anxiety in Korea about America's commitment to defend the South Korea from an attack. Over 70% of respondents in a survey by the Che Institute for Advanced Studies were in favor of Korea developing its own weapons, and over 60% expressed doubts that the U.S. would defend Korea if the North threatened the U.S. mainland with a nuclear reprisal. So we heard a lot about what we're doing through the NCG to try to address those fears and bring South Korea into the process. So how can we really reassure? I know reassurance is it's an unfillable bucket, right? But what can we do here?
We have to keep doing what we're doing. I mean, like you said, it's hard to always know what is the exact thing we need to do to convince everybody and to feel more confident in the U.S. commitment. So we did the Washington Agreement, as I said. We started a new group, the NCG. We reestablished the other extended deterrence talks that we have. We, during the NCG, we had a SSBM visit South Korea. We had a B-52 also there. So we're doing everything that we can, but we will continue to do this, because we recognize that there still is a significant amount of public in South Korea that still doubts U.S. commitment, which we have said several times is ironclad. So I think it's going to be something that we have to do, working closely with our ROK colleagues to continue to push the message. And we understand that as you have more ballistic missile tests by North Korea, as they continue to build up their military, that will naturally create concern. So we understand exactly why that's the case. But we will continue to do activities that we think will help. But it's going to be very important for us to work with the ROK, who's over there able to see their public and try to figure out what are the words, what are the key ways in which we could continue to reassure them of our commitment.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Jessica, over to you, and maybe even thinking through the next time North Korea does a provocation, what can we do to make sure that that extended deterrence message is really clear to both the adversary, because we're doing deterrence at the same time that we're doing assurance to our ally.
So I first would say that I'm not at all surprised that there's continues to be this sentiment in South Korea, because these things take time to take hold. It's just like with interpersonal relationship. Whenever there's been trials and tribulations, it takes a while to regain that trust. So I don't think that we should necessarily be surprised by it. But at the same time, to what Ambassador Jenkins said, we need to keep doing what we're doing. But there's in thinking through that, I was in South Korea in October and just recently in January. There's a lot of concerns about our upcoming election, and we need to be able to move past concerns that a change in an administration will bring back a change in policy. So try to institutionalize the relationship where it can go through possible ebbs and flows and not go through, tensions in the relationship. I think a big part of that is going to be, like, as Ambassador Jenkins said, we've brought back some of these meetings in EDSCG. We need to make sure that in the future that we don't give up alliance equities that could possibly affect readiness, whether it's our military exercises or whether it's these forums, because the big amount of space does have an effect on the relationship and reassuring our allies.
The other thing is also, helping our Korean public understand that, to show that we're the responsible party. We are transparent when we have military exercises. We let people know we want to be seen as a responsible one. Obviously, the DPRK is not.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's leading by example, in the sense that we want to be seen as we abide by the NPT. We promote the NPT. We still see it as a valuable part of our national security, for global security, for promoting the norms. We're not violating Security Council resolutions like the DPRK is with each ballistic missile test that they do. They're having new relationships with countries like Russia. I mean, so part of it is, having these, showing with the submarine visit, with the NCG talks, the EDSCG, we do press releases after those, we push those out to the public, but also showing that we are trying to be responsible, in what we're doing, and leading by example in that way.
Absolutely. And I really like this assurance as a practice and a relationship that gets reinforced and compounded over time and through these personal relationships, and through the institutionalization, which you mentioned, Jessica. And so some of the things that we're seeing in terms of institutionalization to kind of hedge against potential future crosswinds are baking institutionally a lot of this trilateral cooperation with Japan. That's been really heartening progress to see. And then the other thing is starting up the conversation on burden sharing a little bit early. I saw that in the headlines and thought that that was maybe a good idea, right? I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about these extended deterrence strategic dialogues. So just for some of us from the outside, like, what is that, and what do we talk about there? What gets accomplished? Why is that beneficial?
They're beneficial for some of the reasons we just talked about, in terms of showing the public, both here and in South Korea, but also in North Korea, as you said, the commitment that we have to South Korea, the commitment that we have to that relationship, the commitment that we have to their defense. So that's one, is the signaling and messaging, so that everyone is aware of that and can hopefully combat some of the things that you mentioned about the public. But on the other hand, it's really, to have these dialogues with South Korea, as we have, as you mentioned, with Japan. It's really to make sure that we have an understanding of these relationships. So, as I said, the NCG, I mentioned some of the things that they're discussing, about some of the nuclear aspects. And then the EDSCG, which I lead with my counterparts at the Department of Defense, is much more broad in terms of the type of things we look at in terms of our relationship. So, I mean, that they're viable discussions because you need to have these discussions with partners and allies, but it's a huge messaging aspect, which we have to keep doing, as we just said earlier, to make sure that the public in both the DPRK or the leadership of the DPRK and our OK colleagues understand and see what we're doing and our commitment to this.
Excellent.
So,
Thank you.
mhm.
So, Jessica, I'm going to turn to you on the trilat angle. So, we've seen the increasing importance of strategic triangles in the region with the US, South Korea, and Japan tightening trilat coordination on the one hand, and then North Korea, Russia, and China as a sort of third wheel to that triangle, increasing their relationship. So, I'd like to ask you to focus on this trilat cooperation. So, in terms of the US, South Korea, Japan angle, what's going on here? What's our homework? What more can we do? And where do you see this going?
So I'll go back to the missile defense comment that, we're starting to see that come online. And I think as that becomes more institutionalized, that increases our deterrent. But there's always so much focus on the military aspects, but I think there's so many other aspects of this trilateral relationship and the bilateral relationships across the relationship that need to be more considered. So Ambassador Jenkins brought up a whole of government approach. Well, we need a whole of government approach also to trilateral cooperation. I noticed the other day that some of the polling data coming out of South Korea specifically, and in Japan to some respect as well, where there's still a good majority of the South Korean public that questions the trajectory of the South Korea-Japanese relationship. And I think that's going to take more people-to-people ties to really strengthen that trilateral bond.
Yep.
And as far as the China angle, I mean, I'm guessing we're going to get to a simultaneous question of conflict there. I think that's going to pose some challenges with issues across the Taiwan Strait, but people also don't talk enough about the possibility of conflict with the Philippines and China and how that might possibly affect trilateral cooperation as far as how we consider simultaneous conflict, because Japan also has a part possibly with the Japanese, Philippines, and U.S. trilateral cooperation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Ambassador Jenkins, over to you on that same question. On trilateral between the U.S., Korea, and Japan, where's it going? What's our homework there?
Well, we see that very important, obviously. I mean, we have, as I said, we have extended deterrence talks, not just with the ROK, but with Japan as well. And we hope to have more trilateral discussions, right? We're not there yet in terms of having these kind of extended deterrence with both countries in a trilateral sense. But that is something that we want to continue to pursue because when you talk about the region, we're talking a lot about the ROK, but our relationship with Japan is also very important, and our relationship with them in terms of deterrence for the DPRK is also very important. And it's not, I mean, the DPRK is not the only one in the region we need to be concerned about. Obviously, you mentioned the PRC as well. Yep. So, it's really looking at a strategy for the entire region. We're looking at 2 countries right now, but there's a strategy for the whole region. Yep. And how we deal with the DPRK and how we deal with the PRC is also part of that larger strategy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And if I could add one more thing, please. Too, we're seeing the institutionalization of trilateral exercises, and I would say that another thing that needs to be considered long term is operationalizing these exercises and the relationship, meaning that as we look at if there was a contingency on the peninsula or elsewhere, what our operational plans are for dealing with those contingencies. So it's one thing to have military exercises. It's different to have operational plans that you are exercising against.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so Ambassador Jenkins, now we get to talk about Russia. So North Korean two-way proliferation with Russia has surpassed anything we've seen in the past, serving as a major blow to the sanctions regime on North Korea and the international effort to deprive Russia of material support for its illegal invasion of Ukraine. In exchange for North Korea providing Russia with both artillery and ballistic missiles, which we've seen in theater in Ukraine, we believe that North Korea has received various military assistance and access to international finance. So how would you characterize the nature of this threat, and what should the U.S. and its allies do to counteract it?
I would characterize it as a very serious concern, a serious threat, because here you have both two countries of strong concern right now, not only just the DPRK and what they have been doing, but also Russia in invading Ukraine, working together. And Russia's giving us a lot of problems in many forums and many situations, not just in this situation, but in many other ways. So it's a one of serious concern. It not only is destabilizing for the region, it's also providing Russia with more ways in which it could continue to fight in Ukraine. It's challenging Security Council resolutions. It's challenging our sanctions regimes, as you said, the Non-Proliferation Treaty. I mean, it's just doing a lot of damage, and so we are very much speaking out against this, working with our partners to make sure that they're also speaking out against this. Looking at how we can use sanctions as we have been using, based on this relationship that they had, despite the fact that they continue to do these things in violation of sanctions. We continue to recognize that those things do have an important role. And looking at all the tools that we have that we have been dealing with North Korea, work with countries to ensure that they are speaking about the importance of Security Council resolutions, looking at interdiction things that we can do. So we're looking at all of our tools and figuring out how we can strengthen and adjust our tools to address what is a very concerning situation and a very dangerous relationship in our view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We see them both empowered and enabled by one another to do more.
Yeah.
And it's the way I've kind of thought about it is, yeah, we've sent North Korea to the doghouse, but now Russia's in the doghouse and Iran to a certain extent. So there's so many countries there that they're having a little buffet.
Yeah, I mean, we have countries that have agreed to Security Council resolutions, violating the very resolutions that they agreed to.
Yeah.
So it's a huge concern, and what they could be. We don't know what they're saying to each other and what they're hoping to sell each other. We know some things, but it's just not good. And Russia, of course, wants to get as much as it can to continue to fight it's unjust war in Ukraine. So it's getting a lot of attention within the U.S. and with our allies, and we're working closely with them on this.
Great. Jessica, any thoughts on this one?
Well, it's really your thoughts, because you in Marcus's article in Foreign Affairs touched on this greatly, and I thought it made a lot of key points. And one thing that I'll just add to the conversation is that when you brought up in that article the necessity of just getting more of our allies and partners on board and strengthening our surveillance of sanctions violations activities is very much so necessary. But it also brings back to the whole government approach again, because if we want to make sure we're supporting Korea as Korea puts on its own sanctions with Russia, that is also going to come to play with making sure that we have diversity of economies and we're supporting each other's our shared prosperity, so that they have the ability to use other markets is very important.
Yeah, and there's in terms of sanctions implementation, sanctions on a piece of paper don't mean very much if they're not being enforced. And so you've got two categories of jurisdictions that are not enforcing, and that's those that lack the political will. That's your Russia and to a certain extent China. And then you've got countries that have the political will, they just don't have the capacity. And so those countries we can work with, right? We can help to build up that capacity. And there's a lot of great organizations that are doing that are getting funding from the U.S. State Department. So that's really good work. And we should keep doing that. For the countries that don't have the capacity, that's the really tricky thing. And that's something that we have to look at, again, to see what more can be done.
Yeah, and I think you're raising the point is new challenges. And I think, as I tell a lot of my colleagues right now, we're facing new and different challenges. Some are new, some are just different. Some are obviously growing in some areas. And so we're seeing new challenges to our sanctions. We're seeing, because the relationship itself, as I said, just creates more problems in a lot of different areas. And so, the thing about deterrence, the thing about, tools that we can use, it's always evolving. It's always evolving. And as the threats evolve, we have to keep evolving,
Yeah.
and adjusting and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work. And that's what people are doing, in government, particularly, is looking at looking at the situation and adjusting. And DoD is looking from their side, and states looking at it from this side, and other parts of the government are looking at it from their side. And we have an interagency process for doing that. But I think it just raises, this is where we are, and these are the challenges, and we just have to keep figuring out the best way to maintain, the peace that we need on the peninsula and in the region. So
Excellent.
mhm.
Okay, so we're going to talk about simultaneity now. This question comes from our partners at the Atlantic Council, Indo-Pacific Security Initiative, where I know you recently spoke about AUKUS with Marcus Garlauskas. So thanks to our friends at IPSI at the Atlantic Council for this question. With military threats from China and North Korea increasing and diversifying, the risk of simultaneous conflicts in the Indo-Pacific is rising. How does this change our deterrence strategy? What additional challenges does this present to the United States and its partners and allies in deterring North Korea? How could we turn simultaneity to our advantage? So a lot of tough ones there.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what we're thinking about. I mean, a lot of these are issues that are raised because it's actually happening. So we are in the process of thinking about these very things. As we look at a situation now, we have, and many have talked about this, how we have another nuclear power to worry about. We always had to worry about, China was always there, but now it's increasing its nuclear weapons, about on track for 1,000 by 2030. So, it raises new challenges in terms of deterrence and how we deal with that situation. I think the important thing is there aren't a whole lot of answers now because we're dealing with this. We're figuring it out, in terms of how do we deal with these new challenges, in those questions and other ones. So it's a process. It's a process that's very. I mean, we keep using the word challenging, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
But we adjust. We try to figure it out, and that's really what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So Jessica, prospect of a two-front war in Asia. What do we do?
Well, I'll first thank Marcus for bringing me on this team, but also sarcastically thank him for bringing up this very difficult question. So, when I think of, and we've talked about this a lot with Marcus, with the simultaneous conflict concerns, I first go back to installation and operationalization of military plans. If we eventually possibly get there where we are able to operationalize our plans, to look at the possibility of having a two-front conflict and what that looks like is because we don't have a NATO system.
Yeah.
What does that look like with the different mini-laterals in the region, whether it's the Philippines, Japan, U.S., the possibility of ROK, U.S., Japan, and also just looking at the ways that the different possibilities, the way the allies might contribute in a conflict. For instance, South Korea might decide to be on the only logistics or humanitarian front. We don't know those different options. In a Taiwan scenario. Yeah. So, it's hard to look at the possibility of or seeing any advantage of simultaneity, but in thinking about it, the only one I can possibly think of is if we get to the point where we are institutionalizing our relationships in the region in a more cohesive unilateral manner, that puts more pressure on China, because at least from what China watchers have said, that China does not support the possibility of a simultaneous conflict. So that possibly that would increase deterrence to keep these things from happening. Is the only possible thing that I can think of that's positive from the possibility of a simultaneous conflict.
Right, because simultaneity offers the opportunity for our adversaries to pose a lot of dilemmas to us in terms of how do we work with our allies to respond to both at the same time. Another thing that Marcus has brought up.
But I also think that once again, as I said, these are things that we're thinking about in the U.S., but these are also things that we think about with our allies and our partners. in terms of the discussions we have, because as we've said several times, I mean, these new challenges increase the need that we have to work multilaterally with countries. I mean, we have anyway, but I think increasingly, as we look at, whether it's deterrence or just in addition to that, like export controls and sanctions and interdictions and actions we do in terms of promoting Security Council resolutions, no matter what it is, we need to work with our allies, and not just the ones in the ROK, not just the ROK in Japan, and not just one in the regions, but our NATO allies and other allies as well, because these are global challenges, and so we need to, as these challenges continue, it also increases the need for us to work with our allies and partners.
I'm really encouraged to hear you say that and to talk about how this is the values-based coalition that is not, it's not Pacific partners over here and European partners over here and never the twain shall meet. There's been some discussion about that, right? And some advocates for that type of approach where we need to segment now and we need to devote our energies more towards this problem than that problem, and a little bit of pushback saying, no, we're the United States. We got to do both at the same time. The other thing I wanted to mention was Marcus Garlauskas' point, which is that posing a question, are the combatant commands that are set up in the Indo-Pacific poised to respond well to a simultaneous attack? And his response is, no, they're not. You've got US-FK and US-FJ with their specific responsibilities, and then Indo-Pacific kind of the overarching responsibility. And with the chance that China could get involved in a North Korea contingency, then who's in charge there, right? Because Indo-Pacific wants to get into the ball game, and US-FK kind of has seniority there in terms of dealing on the peninsula. So it just gets so complicated so fast. So proposing a rethink of how we maybe do the division of labor between our combatant commands.
Yeah, I visit combatant commands, which, and I ask that question very often about, the division of labor, but they do have overall have opportunities to have these overall conversations with amongst the combatant commands on these particular issues, because it is coming up. And each command I visit, they say, yes, we are having these conversations with other combatant commands to try to decide on these kind of things. So once again, new challenges. There's thinking and action to figure out how to deal with these because they are new. So we don't have a lot of. It's not like we have an answer right now. We're doing it. We're in the process. Just as these challenges develop, we are also developing. And I think that's the important thing to take away is, looking at the way things are is because they haven't happened before. And so now they're happening. So we're developing. Yeah.
Great point.
Yeah.
Jessica, anything on that one? Or
I think that, it's not just the concern about, because it always comes up because of China, right? And how the different bilateral alliances would work together. But even on the Korean Peninsula, when we consider, like we were talking about earlier about a provocation or some type of hostile activity, there's also discussions about a rethink of the way the command structure is on the Korean Peninsula. As far as, Combined Forces Command doesn't become a war-fighting unit until DEFCON 2 is declared. So if there's a provocation or some type of hostile act that the alliance or South Korea wants to respond, like making sure that we have the mechanisms in place below the threshold of conflict to do so is also very important.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So before I turn to our audience questions, so please prepare your audience questions and identify yourself, and then keep your questions short and sweet so we can get to more than just one, so no monologues, please. But before we get to that, and we'll get microphones out to you, I wanted to ask, so there's a lot of young people in this audience, students in this audience, people who have aspirations to do very much the things that you two are doing. So any advice from your experience that you might impart to them?
Yes. Obviously, you can hear the challenges that we're facing now. And I think it's important that we continue to have people who are passionate, who are interested to be part of how we resolve these questions. New thinking about approaches, new ways of looking at things, I think is going to be important, because these are. I mean, we've had challenges. We've had 9/11. We've had back to when the Soviet Union fell apart, and even before that, they had challenges. And we always have to kind of sit back and think about what does this mean in terms of how do we continue to advance some kind of stability in the international system? How do we work with partners and allies to make sure that we can answer these new threats? And we are at a point right now where we are seeing things that we don't know the answers. We don't know necessarily where things are going to end in some of the conflicts that are happening now. And it goes way beyond just the Korean Peninsula and what we're talking about now. There's just things that we need answers to. And so we need a next generation to really think about these. And I hope that there is a lot of interest from young people to get involved in these harder questions, because we do need answers to these harder questions, because we don't know what the world's going to look like 20 years from now. But now's the time to really be thinking about it. So I encourage everyone, if you're interested in this, to continue to do it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
We need you.
Jessica, how about you?
I would say two things. One, the importance of finding good mentors like Ambassador Jenkins, folks that are not only have paved paths for us, but have a willingness to do like Ambassador Jenkins has done and really try to mold the next generations. It's so important to have people to look up to and see people, especially that look like you, are doing things that you want to do. Another thing I would say is doing things that scare you, like panels at the Korea Society, because they really do help you grow and help you evolve and meet new people. So just not being afraid to do those things that scare you, to include, as our good friend Jonathan said in the audience, reminded me right before this, making sure you're writing and publishing and getting your ideas out there. Thank you for that reminder that I need to write.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So let's turn to our audience now. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll get a microphone. Ambassador Elliott, we'll get a microphone out to you.
Hi, I'm Susan Elliott. I'm with the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. We do a lot with the Korea Society. We also do track 2 discussions on North Korea. Mm-hmm. And I guess I wondered, this is more related to China and how the U.S. and China, after President Biden met with President Xi, for you, Ambassador Jenkins, since they agreed to start doing some mill-to-mill cooperation, is there is this a topic, North Korea, that might be on the agenda between the U.S. and China? Because I do think, this is my personal opinion, that China doesn't want North Korea to become more well-developed or to drop a nuclear bomb or even test a nuclear weapon. So I just wondered, your thoughts on, or if that is something that, the U.S. is considering doing.
We are always interested in having conversations with the PRC, okay, in areas where we can have good conversation or just conversation, and not just on these issues, but there's a number of issues that we're working to have conversations with the PRC. On the mill-to-mill, of course, that's good because there was a point when the PRC did not want to talk with our military. And so the fact that that's moving forward is very good. I don't think China is in China's interest to see the Korea blow up or North Korea to get extremely more aggressive, because it's really not in anyone's interest in the region. So hopefully the mill-to-mill talks will continue. There's other talks also, so these kind of exchanges are good. We also hope that we can follow up on the meetings that we had in November, where we had a chance to talk about strategic stability and crisis management. The more we can have transparency with the PRC, the better, particularly when you're talking about concerns about what we're talking about the hard security issues and about their development of nuclear weapons, which is, more than obviously they've ever had, and on pace for 1,000, as I said, by 2030. So having as much transparency as we can is good. So even if we can't get to the point where we can have an arms control discussion, can we at least talk about strategic stability? Can we at least talk about crisis management? Can we at least have an understanding, on how we can ensure that neither one does something that the other one is nervous about? So the mill to mill is great, and we hope that we can continue to have more discussions on these other issues as well. So
I'll just add that, I do hope that those conversations are happening, and delighted to hear that that's the aim. But I would also say that I hope that our allies and partners, especially, not only just in the region, but also our NATO partners and EU partners, are also having those discussions and just adding to the audience and folks that are concerned to possibly put more pressure on China to help with the situation.
yeah, and on that, some of our partners are also having conversations. So I mean, and to that point, we always encourage, all my bilats. I say, if you have a good relationship with China, can you at least tell them that they need to talk to us? Because some countries have different relationships with them, and so another one of why we have to have partners and do this multilaterally. But some of our partners are also having more conversations with the PRC. So,
And this is such a frustrating one because throughout the Cold War, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were able to engage in these types of talks, no matter how at odds we were. And there's a perception that China does not view these kinds of confidence-building measures, crisis communications, does not view them as mutually beneficial.
yeah, and on that point, there's two things on that. One is on the Russia situation. Very true. I mean, we've been able to have these conversations during Cold War. Unfortunately, more recently, with their actions with the New START treaty and suspending that, and all their other actions that they're doing in terms of getting out of, like, the CFE treaty, de-ratifying the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban treaty, and their actions in, like, the Biological Weapons Convention process, the Non-Proliferation Non-Proliferation Treaty situation. They're being more obstructionist, and they're not being able to decouple like they used to.
Yeah.
They're attaching everything now to Ukraine, and so that's making it difficult to have those traditional conversations where bilateral. We can say this is above a lot of other things. On the China side, we have never. This is different because I don't think we haven't had these kind of conversations with them in the past, and so we don't have that history with them. At least there we can say we don't have that history of decoupling or their decoupling. I think that's more challenging for them, and that's something we'd like to get to. But at this point, Russia's pushing back on us having conversations, and we also we're trying to get China to the table. So it's very challenging, very difficult.
So I want to get to one of our questions from our virtual audience. So David Brunstrom from Reuters asked the question about South Korea's indigenous weapons, which I think we addressed very well. And now we'll get to one from Lynn Turk from the Pacific Century Institute. So Lynn asks, how much more dangerous is the situation in Korea given Kim Jong-un's February 9th speech? So that's a speech where he threatened to attack South Korea if provoked. And that has spurred much conversation about whether North Korea's strategic aims have changed and to what degree. So what is your assessment? Well,
obviously it's not a great speech, and it's not something that is going to lead to any more stability or in the region. But for us, we still are maintaining the same position we had before, which is we are open to dialogue at any time with them. We still seek a peninsula without nuclear weapons. So we hear that. We know that that's definitely not going in the right direction, but it hasn't necessarily changed our position in terms of wanting to have some dialogue, but also, strongly supporting the ROK, strongly supporting Japan in terms of our extended deterrence. So
And the statement was conditional, right? It didn't say we will attack South Korea and that's our plan. It said if triggered, whenever we are provoked or attacked. So it's a conditional assertion. So in that sense, we've seen this before, right? It's not a new type of
yeah,
threat.
it reminds me of Russia's de-ratifying the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. It said, we are de-ratifying the treaty, but we won't test unless you test first to the U.S., which we already said many times ad nauseum. We haven't tested in the past 30 years, and we have no intention of doing a nuclear test.
Curious.
So it's that same kind of condition. But yeah, you're right. They did condition it. So
Jessica, any thoughts?
I would say that I'm a bit concerned about, again, going back to the possibility of, hostile acts, and then, we respond, and then does this come into play, especially as North Korea has mentioned wanting to move the maritime boundary, and then we're going into fishing season. What is considered a hostile act from their standpoint, or do they move to do some type of 2010 type black activities? And we're in an environment now where I guess that we will be responding. That's what the South Korean government has said. So I think that, I'm glad to see that the alliance is working towards ensuring that they're prepared for that. But I think that this kind of rhetoric, it seems like it's more in, I agree with what other observers have said, that it's more in line with what they've been saying. It's increasing, but I think that there's that concern of the below threshold type of provocations, and ensuring that we're ready for that, and then wondering how North Korea is going to respond if we do need to respond.
And it's election season. So as Victor Cha shows us with his beyond parallel data set, they love to test and provoke around South Korean elections and U.S. elections. So we got both of them this year. And potentially in Japan as well, there could be an election. So let's go to Rob, one of my students. We'll get you a microphone, Rob.
Good afternoon, Ambassador Major Taylor. This is a question about the intersection of efficacy and sanctions and missile capability. As the U.S. and South Korea are seeking to apply pressure on an expanding North Korean missile capability, what particular capabilities can the DPRK, not produce in-house that are effective targets for sanctioning? What do they seek to gain from the Soviet or from the Russians or from allies abroad?
So what are they seeking to gain from the relationship with Russia?
Specifically, like technical capabilities, missile guidance systems. What can they not make themselves that they have to seek elsewhere?
So maybe something like a MIRV, right?
Yeah. I'm not. I remember I talked about some of the things that they're looking at, receiving. If I want to give you more details, or maybe it's not in these notes, because I don't know off the top of my head, but I can. It's in my notes, so I can get that for you. If you want to go ahead, and I can.
Yeah, I would ascertain that they're looking for help with like their satellite capability, like the lenses for that satellite. I would also consider, more help in their solid fuel missile capabilities, and also their submarine capabilities, their nuclear submarine capabilities, so they can have a more secured, gain a second strike capability, or like some of the things that I would think that they're things that they would want from Russia.
Yeah, the things I have here is fighter aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, armored vehicles, ballistic missile production equipment or materials, and other advanced technologies. So that's our assessment. We don't exactly know everything that they're looking for, but that's our assessment of what they're looking for.
And in terms of the ballistic missiles, one of the real big concerns is MIRV, so multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles. North Korea is still working on the reentry vehicle to come back into the atmosphere. And if they were to be able to deliver a payload of multiple warheads per missile, that could quickly overwhelm our missile defense. That would be a real blow to the deterrence posture that Russia is poised to help them out with. Russia's really good at MIRVs. They've done them for years. So that's a real concern. Can we get another one? Yeah. We'll get a microphone over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Raquel Miller, and I'm the founder of Bunchful Enterprise. We are a social enterprise organization. And as I listen today to, the world teetering again, continues to teeter on this tension, and, don't provoke us. What is that list of provocations? My question is from a different angle. So we are very much engaged in advancing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for a better world. And we actually shine a spotlight on those who are, through philanthropy, helping to move toward achievement of these goals. And so my question is, how can civil society, how can social enterprises engage effectively and help toward just achieving some modicum of engagement or just helping toward achieving some better stance, I guess?
That's a great question. So what can ordinary folks do and civil society groups outside of the government to help with stabilizing the Korean Peninsula, promoting peace elsewhere as well?
I mean, I have a specific answer, but that's not directly. I'm trying to think if I can. There's a lot that's happening in the. I'll start from here. There are things that are happening in the what we call the hard security area, which is what we're talking about, that are promoting sustainable development goals. And I could talk about that. I'm trying to figure out how to connect it to the DPRK and how it can be helped. I mean, the DPRK is a hard case. I mean, it's hard to think about how we can really.
Yeah, don't feel
promote-
limited there. You
Yeah,
talk
that's
about it.
yeah. I'm a move, but I just want to say that that's a tough case overall in many ways. But there are many things that we do in the hard security field that do promote sustainable development goals. In fact, my 3 bureaus in AUKUS, when I asked them what are they doing to lay out for me the 17 goals and what are they doing related to that, because no one thinks about SDGs in these spaces, right? And I get the question very often in bilaterals from countries, particularly in the global south. What are you doing for SDGs? I mean, you can see it in other parts, but when it comes to hard security, it's very more challenging. And they came back with like a 33-page document that listed, which it was very interesting because look at all the things that we're doing in the SDGs that's related to the SDGs. And it was great because then I'm able to use that when I have my bilaterals. Everything from, there's a lot in the nuclear technology field that's promoting things like promoting cancer treatments, water sanitation, food security. The IAEA has something called Atoms for Food. They have Rays of Hope, which is helping countries with the cancer treatment. In the United States, we have something called the Sustainable Dialogue, where we put money, and we work with the UK on this. We work with countries in the global south to promote issues that are for sustainable development for them. And this is all based on nuclear technology. But there's also other things. I mean, when you talk about getting rid of chemical weapons, which the U.S. got rid of all of its declared chemical weapons last year, it's a big accomplishment. And how that is, what does that open up in terms of not putting money toward those things, not sustaining those things, and what that can be used for in terms of development. We talk about another part of my bureau that gets rid of. The U.S. puts the most money of any country toward landmine removal and destroying unexploded ordnances. We have stories where we have NGOs who work with us. In Vietnam, there's an NGO group of all women who are doing demining. And there's stories about how the landmines we got rid of allows for endangered species to come back in parts of the world. I mean, it's so many things in terms of the hard security space. There's work that we could talk about. So there's a lot that doesn't get attention in terms of how hard security, the work we're doing to make the world a better, safe place, which people don't think about hard security, but isn't that what we're doing? If we're getting rid of weapons, if we're getting rid of landmines, if we're trying to have countries live up to the norm of not developing nuclear weapons, chemical, biological weapons, not using them, these all are promoting peace. They're promoting ability to do more in development. And so I'm glad you asked the question because I spent a lot of time thinking about that and thinking about how NGOs and civil society can help us get that message out there, particularly to countries who don't think that there's things that we do in our, and it's partly our fault because we haven't made that case, and even some of my bureaus were surprised by the 33-page document. Wow, So, I gave a speech on this at the Stimson Center, which is a think tank in DC. And so my goal is to have more of these conversations and happy to have civil society, research institutes think about how we could help me get that message out. So it's not particularly North Korea, but there's it's nuclear, so it's a little connection there.
That's a great answer. Thank you. I learned a lot.
Thanks.
Jessica, anything?
Yeah, I
else?
think we're at a great place to talk about that because we're at the Korea Society and to getting the message out. I think that's one of the things that organizations can do, can help us educate the public on the issues. And just coming back from South Korea, I actually engaged with a couple of organizations that help defectors resettle. And it was really eye-opening, the amount of support that they need. And I think just the education, like I learned so much, even though I focus in this space, there's just a lot that I didn't realize. So I think those types of organizations are also often like overlooked and should have more focus.
I have so many people to thank for making this program possible. First, of course, is Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins and Major Jessica Taylor. Can you please help me give them a nice warm round of applause? Thank you to Ambassador Jenkins' team, Marina, and everybody. You were such a delight to work with. Thank you to my team, Chelsea in the back there. Chelsea, thank you very much. Peter, Bradley, making sure that the production works wonderfully. Tashi and Heiji, our wonderful interns who are around in the back there. You did such a wonderful job. Thank you all for coming in person. We've got some dumplings for you in there. So stick around, hang out, eat lunch, get to meet our speakers. And thank you so much for coming to the Korea Society. Thanks, everybody.